John Dalton was born in 1766 to a Quaker family in Cumberland, England. He lived in Cumberland for his entire life until he was offered a job in Manchester, England. Research gathered from the article John Dalton states, his father was a weaver who owned a house and a small amount of land. Both of his parents were Quakers. Although Quakers were Christians, they were seen as dissenters by the established Church of England. As a result of this, John Dalton's higher educational opportunities were restricted to dissenting places of education. John Dalton was an intelligent child who took an interest in the world around him and tried to learn as much as he could about everything. He attended his village school until he was 11 and then began helping as a teacher. At age 15, he started helping his older brother John to run a Quaker boarding school in the town of Kendal, 40 miles from his home. All the while, he continued teaching himself science, mathematics, Latin, Greek, and French. By the time he was 19, he had become the school's principal, continuing in this role until he was 26 years old.
Other facts and interesting things about John Dalton. As stated in the article John Dalton from Britannica, in 1793, Dalton moved to Manchester to teach mathematics at a dissenting academy, the New College. He took with him the proof sheets of his first book, a collection of essays on meteorologic topics based on his own observations together with those of his friends John Gough and Peter Crossway. This work, Meteorological Observations and Essays, was published in 1793. It created little stir at first, but contained original ideas that, together with Dalton's more developed articles, marked the transition of meteorology from a topic of general folklore to a serious scientific pursuit.
Also stated in the same article, soon after his arrival at Manchester, Dalton was elected a member of the Manchester Literary and Philosophical Society. His first contribution to this society was a description of the defect he had discovered in his own and his brother's vision. This paper was the first publication on colorblindness, which for some time thereafter was known as Daltonism.
John Dalton was known most for his contributions to the atomic theory. He was the first at attempting to describe matter in terms of atoms and their properties. The atomic theory itself states, 1. The elements are made of atoms, which are tiny particles too small to see. 2. All atoms of a particular element are identical. 3. Atoms of different elements have different properties. Their masses are different and their chemical reactions are different. 4. Atoms cannot be created, destroyed, or split. 5. In chemical reaction, atoms link to one another or separate from one another. 6. Atoms combine in simple whole number ratios to form compounds. From this, we learn that atoms are not invisible but made from protons, neutrons, and electrons, and can vary in weight and number of neutrons. Dalton also created a model of the atom, but it was just a basic sphere. Although his atomic model laid the groundwork for models after him, it was not as nearly significant as his atomic theory of matter.
When testing his theories, he did countless chemical experiments. Dalton tested the ratio of one amount of an element to another amount of an element. As stated in the article, Dalton's atomic theory, for example, Dalton found that 12 grams of carbon would react with 16 grams of oxygen to form the compound we now call carbon monoxide, or with 32 grams of oxygen to form carbon dioxide. The ratio of oxygen masses of 32 to 16, which simplifies to 2 to 1, intrigued Dalton. Analyzing all of the data he had collected, Dalton stated that his belief that matter exists as atoms. He went further than Democritus by stating that atoms of different elements have different masses. Experiments like these are the types of trials that John Dalton constantly performed. These experiments helped Dalton figure out characteristics and rules of atoms through indirect evidence.
John Dalton challenged Democritus' theory of atoms. He worked alone in his research as he was one of the first scientists to try and understand the atom. Dalton laid the foundation for future chemists, going as far as being called the father of chemistry for his contributions.
The article John Dalton states, when he was 71 years old, John Dalton had a small stroke, or paralysis as it was known then. A year later, he had a more significant stroke that left him unable to speak as clearly as he could. In 1844, when he was 77, another stroke hit him. He died at the age of 77 on July 27, 1844. His scientific reputation was so great that when his body was placed in Manchester Town Hall, it was visited by more than 40,000 people paying their respects. John Dalton was buried in Manchester in Ardwick Cemetery.